Okay.
You can have a joke or something.
Or so, for 2 minutes start. I don't know, I got 6 o'clock. Check, check, check. Check 1. Can you hear me? Am I on the speakers, though? Yeah? Okay, great. All right, so welcome. There's a reason, a story behind why we're up here tonight, which is our Maria had gone to a conference where they played a song and everyone in the audience sang together, and it was a beautiful experience. So, we're hopefully here to recreate that experience for Maria tonight, and we hope that you all will sing along with us. So, without further ado, 1, 2, 3, 4. Love, 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 love. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you can say that can't be sung. And nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. Nothing you can make that can't be made. No one you can say that can't be said. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be in time. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love, love. Love is all you need. There's nothing you can know that can't be known. Nothing you can see that can't be shown. And no way you can be, this is where you're meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love, love. Love is all you need. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love, love. Love is all you need. 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 Love is all you need.
It's a perfect song. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. But I need to go back just to have this. So my colleagues are quite right that we made this small song today because we have visitors from the Constructive Institute in Aarhus. And I learned that every time they have a meeting, they start with a song. and I think that's a very good way to start a meeting and a debate like the one we're going to have today. Because I love singing, and you know that when you sing, you also become more happy. So, I'd like to welcome. I said it to you. I will forget to present myself. I said it. So, who am I? My name is Maria Dalby. I'm head of media relation here at GRID-Arendal. Our slogan is environmental knowledge for change. And we actually own this building, we own this backyard, and we rent it out to Altinget during Arendalsuken. But today we have our events, and tonight we have the Green Mingles that somebody have mentioned. And we're so happy to see you here. So let me introduce and welcome our guest, Ulrik Hagerup from Constructive Institute in Aarhus. Please welcome, go to the scene. Yeah, I can get out the tables. And Ingrid Tinmansvik, project leader for constructive journalism at NRK. And last but not least, Sanaya Rech, project lead for international projects at the Constructive Institute. And maybe you can move the table so you're not that far away, like.
So?
Yes.
Are you happy?
I'm happy now. I'll
Great.
remove this one. It doesn't look good, even though it's paper. So today we want to tell you about the framework of constructive journalism. This is a fresh approach that focuses on finding solutions, showing perspectives, and fostering open conversations. So our goal is to understand how this form of journalism can make a real difference, especially in reporting on critical issues like climate change. So let us begin with you, Ulrik. I'll just, like this. So you dedicated your career to promoting constructive journalism. Can you start by defining what constructive journalism is and why it's important?
Yes. I think I can. I ought to. But first of all, thank you for being here. You could have been out drinking already, but you chose to stay here. Maybe you couldn't find the exit, but thank you very much. And thank you for the song. And I've been walking around here in Arendal thinking, I'm a member of the board of the Danish Folkemøde, and thinking this is first time I'm here. And I'm thinking, we want our country back. This is a fantastic place, and I don't know what you are doing the 17th of May, celebrating separation from Denmark. That's a mistake. If we join forces again, just imagine how good we could all be in handball. So that could be neat. So if I could start with a question, because I'm a journalist. I'm an educated journalist. That's all I've ever wanted to be. And a lot of times in my career, I've been talking to people, or people are trying to yell at me, asking me at parties or after studio debates or whatever. People say, "Why are you so negative?" And I say, "Shut up. I mean, we are not negative. We're journalists. This is what we do." And I get depressed. Our job is to tell people what's going on. If people fly big airplanes into tall buildings on Manhattan, we cover it. I'm sorry you're depressed, but that's reality. Shut up. But I think my mistake throughout my whole career, and my colleagues' mistake, has been we're not very good at listening. So if we started to ask a few questions and listen to what people say, and I can try an experiment here. Think about your own news consumption or your way you perceive this. If somebody from the media asked you, do you need more news in your life? What would your answer be? Yes or no? No. Do you need faster news? Do you need more information in general in your life? Do you need more programs with politicians yelling at each other in TV? No. We know if we dare to ask people what people would answer to these questions, but we are so busy we don't ask people. But still, so that is what we have been doing increasingly. We give people more. We try to compete on speed, be faster than X, former Twitter. We try to be more free than Google. We try to be overloading people with a lot of information, and we try to facilitate the public conversation, especially on TV, by telling people this program is something from warfare. This is duel, this is crossfire, this is or boxing, this is red corner, this is blue corner. And we are creating this atmosphere of toxic environment in politics. We are giving people a screwed picture of reality in journalism in general, except, of course, in Norway, where everything is perfect. For the rest of the world, this is what we do. We focus so much on the extreme that people end up thinking that the extreme is normality. And a lot of people are getting depressed. It's not because they don't want news. It's not because they don't want to understand what's going on in the world, but they don't like the way we perceive it in the traditional news media. Especially young people and women. Young women, we have lost them years ago. But instead of doing what we have always done, we could start doing, saying, it's not because people don't want more news, it's not because they don't want news, they just don't want more, they want better. They don't want faster, but they need somebody to trust, right? It's not because they don't want more, they don't like to have information, but they are overwhelmed. And they would tell us if we dared asking them, could you please clean up the mess? Tell me what's new, what is really important, what is baloney and waste of time, what is purely entertainment, and what is not worth the time. So that's what we could do, and we could train ourselves to be facilitators of a public conversation, also among politicians, about who has a great idea to solve the problems we have. And that is the essence of constructive journalism. Try to answer a question that I never learned in journalism school. It's called, now what? And another question, how? I was trained to focus on the what, the where, the how much, and if I did investigative journalism, also who's to blame for the problem we're in. Focusing on either now or yesterday, and you can see up here. So constructive journalism is a word we invented because we thought we needed a vocabulary to talk about quality journalism in a different way. So we said journalism should also be about tomorrow. It's not a North Korean version of journalism where we only look at the sky is blue, everything is great. But we start when we have uncovered a problem, we go to the next phase, which is, what can we do about it? What have other people done? So when we do stories in Denmark, and we have done that, about the fact that almost 20% of young teenagers in Denmark now smoke, which means a completely failure of policies in Denmark for the last 30 years. We wanted the first smoke-free generation. It didn't work. Of course, we should have a debate of who should be fired, who was the failure, all that. But the interesting thing is to ask the question, has anyone in the world had the same ambition and succeeded? And what did they do differently that we might learn from? That's the constructive question, right? And really annoyingly, each time we ask this question, we go to Norway. In Norway, less than 2% of young kids smoke in high school, compared to 20 in Denmark. And we go to Norway as a news crew to figure out, what did you do differently? First of all the young people up here, they put plastic bags with nicotine up here so they get cancer here instead of in their lungs. That's one thing. But then they made it completely uncool to smoke due to advertising campaigns, and cigarettes cost 3 times as much here as they do in Denmark. With that story, which TV2 in Denmark did and created a top story, they changed the conversation in Denmark. Now it was not a question who's to blame, but it was what can we do? It's actually, you can't say it's unavoidable, because they did something in Norway. It's unacceptable. So now we can have a political discussion about what to do about it. Final anecdote. When we took a lot of reporters to Kenya, talked to them in UNEP, and we had discussion about, and they talked about all the problems in the world, and then they said, oh, but it's really bad, it's so difficult to get reporters around the world to cover what we're doing, and blah, blah, blah. And for instance, because we actually are able to solve something if we do it right, like the ozone layer. And then he went on talking, and these 30 journalists, they were, excuse me, what was that about the ozone layer? And then, yeah, we solved it. None of the journalists knew it, and I'm sure my mom doesn't know it. I'm sure your parents do not know. Maybe you didn't know. We had a problem in the 80s with the ozone layer. There was experts went together. It was documented what was wrong. There were recommendations. Politicians went together. They implemented laws, and then actually the ozone layer problem almost disappeared because we did something. Just imagine if we had in the media the same approach to climate change, or to plastics, or the environmental things. It is possible to do something, but I and my colleagues have been trained to think a good story is a bad story. If it bleeds, it leads. It has to be something about a conflict, something dramatic, or sensational, extreme, in order to make the front page. And that's why a lot of politicians in the world, they focus that on exactly doing that. Helped by communication people coming from news, helping them, okay, in order to get into news, you have to hit somebody else. You have to attack. Nobody wants to hear about your ideas, but you have to attack the other person's ideas, right? And that's how you destroy politics. That's how you create mistrust. That's how you create polarization in the world. Polarization is becoming the next pandemic in the world. And we are part of the problem in journalism, and we need to be part of the solution, and that's what constructive journalism is about. Amen.
And we're just glad that there's some, not a lot of white old men in the panel, but only Ulrik.
Just a noisy one.
Yeah. No, sorry, Ulrik. Of course, we love to hear you talk.
Yeah.
That's why we invited you. But Ingrid, I'd like to, you are constructive editor at NRK, and I would like to hear why NRK started working with the constructive framework.
We really wanted to be a part of the singing sect.
Yeah.
No, we started acknowledging what Ulrich has been talking about, that we need to change something. We need to look at ourselves and see what are we doing wrong, because we saw that there's an increase of especially young people saying that they avoided the news. It made them depressed. And during the pandemic, this skyrocketed, and people were falling apart all over, so we decided we need to do something, and we need to do it now. And we, as a public broadcaster, we have an extra responsibility of showing people that there is hope. There are people working on solutions. So we decided that I gathered a group at NRK. We made a definition similar to the ones they made, and then we went to the general director at the very top management at NRK and told them that we need to implement this new strategy across the whole organization, not just the news, and we need to it needs to be a part of our strategy, but also our morning meetings and also our conversations by the coffee machine. We need to change. So that's what we started doing, and now it has become a part of our DNA, actually.
And have you had any response from the audience of doing this differently?
Definitely. I've never had as many responses as I've had since I started working with constructive journalism. I mean, everything from people finding me on Instagram, telling me they cried because they were so thankful that we showed people that there was hope, to people, or we can see it in our numbers, that for instance, our climate articles, the constructive climate articles reach a higher number of readers than the non-constructive climate articles. We also see across our news articles in general, we reach a much higher younger audience, and we have a higher average reading time. So the impact is there. This works, and now we're just trying to make everyone else come along and change journalism.
Actually, you should know that NRK in the world, a lot of newsrooms are trying to go this way, but NRK is the showcase around the world. It's one of the few places where the board of a news organization has decided we want to use this for our content strategy, not only on news, but also on children's program, documentaries, fiction. which is amazing. And they have even hired the first constructive editor who tried to implement this throughout NRK. And I'm not saying or claiming that NRK does it perfectly. Sometimes I take a screenshot and said, you were not at work today. But it's very depressing reading NRK website today. But it's far better than darkblooded.no. That's not hard.
No, but it's also not about, because for some people, we're like, oh my gosh, what are people going to say? Like, people don't like the term constructive journalism. What do you mean? Is what we're doing destructive? But it's basically just about going back and doing good journalism. And I hope that we don't even have to call it constructive journalism in a few years, because it's just like going back to basics, doing great, thorough journalism, where we show more nuances and solutions and help people understand the news. And that's what the young people say that they want.
Yeah. And NRK also sent one of your journalists to the Climate Explorer program, so that makes a good bridge to Sunaira to tell about what is the Climate Explorer program.
Yeah, so as these two have said, we have a problem in the news industry around news avoidance, where people are turning away, which is affecting news figures and the lifeblood of the news industry. But what you find is when you're covering a protracted crisis, like the climate change crisis or COVID, or the Ukraine war, the problem's even worse. So you have journalists battling with these two issues where people are getting disillusioned with the news anyway, and then you're trying to tell them a story that's going on and will go on for the future. So the way we cover climate change is incredibly important for us, and in general, environmental crises that are here for the present and will be with us for the future. So it's something that we're looking at a lot on how we can take these constructive approaches and have them help journalists around the world engage their audiences around these really difficult topics where they have to be engaged. And we do this in lots of different ways. But the Climate Explorer project that you're talking about, we've just wrapped up. And we took 5 journalists from 5 continents, from Argentina, India, Kenya, Norway, and climate journalists from NRK, and Australia. And we brought them to our institute, and we said, okay, you have 5 months to reimagine climate journalism. Traditional climate journalism is not working as it is. People are saying if you look at the research, people say they want more climate journalism, especially young people, especially women. But the climate journalism they're getting is not serving them. It just makes them feel depressed and hopeless. So you have 5 months to reimagine this. And what was so powerful about it is because they all came from very different media contexts, political contexts, but they all shared this dilemma of how do we grip our journalists with the biggest story of our time, climate change. And we got them to meet people from great minds from within journalism, but also from other sectors, academics. And a key element was scientists. And they would have a session with scientists from this CO2 capture center every week, and really got to understand the intricacies of what these scientists are doing. And after 5 months of rethinking, starting from scratch, they came up with what they call a constructive climate lens, which is a set of recommendations on how you can use these approaches wherever you are in the world as a journalist to help tackle this problem of people shutting down from news about climate change and environmental crises.
And maybe we should say, bridging those 2 approaches, that we looked into the stories that NRK has done on climate. They're actually one of the best newsrooms in the world covering climate change, because they have assigned a lot of reporters on this subject and being one of the first newsrooms to do it. I know 5 years ago they didn't, but they did it late, but they did it. So we have created what we call a constructive algorithm. So we are able to go through a website and figure out which of these stories are constructive, as we call them, inspirational, nuanced, fact-based, and engaging. So we found them. So there were 1,200 stories published by NRK. So we piled them in one group here, the constructive stories, and we took the others, non-constructive stories here. And then we pair that with NRK's own numbers on how many people clicked on these stories, how much time did they spend on them, and what did they think about NRK satisfaction rate with NRK after reading these stories. And in all these areas, there was a significant difference that people read constructive stories much more, they clicked more on them, they spent more time on them, they shared them more on social media, and they were more satisfied and trusted NRK more after reading them. So that's the first documentation we have, and NRK is media license financed. But for now we're working with commercial publishers, and if people don't read them, the stories, if they don't spend time on them or think that it's meaningful reading them, they will probably not pay for it either. So we're very close to be able to document. This is not only good for self-esteem, but it's also good for the wallet. So there's a commercial value doing this kind of journalism. And when that comes out to newsrooms around the world, this will go crazy.
And like that is one of the visions you have for the Constructive Institute, is that you actually want to change the whole media industry.
Yeah.
And
yeah, right. And when we started the Constructive Institute, which is, by the way, not a consultancy company, because then you only preach for the rich, and media companies do not have money. So we started out as a foundation ourselves, an NGO. So we get donations from foundations and organizations from around the world. And in the beginning, we said, with a mission statement that was so ridiculous that in the beginning, I couldn't say it without laughing, but now I repeat it so much, so in the end I could. We want to change the global news culture in 5 years. And that's really naive, right? But 5 years because we only had funding for 5 years. But now we've been in the business for 8 years, and we haven't changed the world yet. But we think there's a potential, and you have to be very cynical as a publisher, editor, or journalism trainer, or journalism student to say, I want to do clickbait. I want to do exactly what my colleagues have been done for the last 15 years, because that's really fun. You have to be cynical to think you should do what you've always done and get the same results. We have to rethink this, and most people around the world can now see this. And now here's a language, an approach that is proven to be useful, and that's why we've created a center in Germany now. We will open a center for Asia Pacific. It's called Constructive Institute Asia Pacific in Melbourne. And we hope, and that's one of the reasons we are here, that we have been, with great partners also from Norway and other Scandinavian countries, do a constructive climate center in Eastern Africa. Yeah. Because we think it's extremely important to tell another narrative about Africa for us, but also in Africa, because African media, they cover Africa just like we do. It's a shithole. There's no hope. There's nothing. There are no opportunities. And if you go to Africa, Sonara lives in Africa, in Nairobi, and knows. I mean, there's so many things happening there but it's not being covered in national or local media in Africa. So we would like to help that, to train them how can they facilitate a public debate on how can we do it better. Instead of journalism either just be something that somebody owns a media company, try to generate eyeballs so they can make money, or connect journalism as a handgun to either the government or the opposition. Journalism and news media should be people's best friend. In the age of AI, more than ever, we need somebody who you can trust, because you can't trust anything else. Who has sent you this? Have they verified it? Based on which principles? That will be the essence for news media. So this will be either the death of journalism, if we just copy what AI is doing. Why should they pay us if a robot can do it? Or it can be a restart for journalism. And I think the latter. And I think we need to be optimistic, but we need to rethink and dare doing things differently.
And I think a lot has happened, just like since the 3 years since I started working on this. In the beginning, people were like, aren't you afraid that people are just going to think that you mean positive news and cats being saved from trees and that you're just this naive girl? And I wasn't really, but it was definitely new to a lot of people. But now I've seen, like, I did presentations for a broadcaster in Brussels like 3 years ago, and they were like, what is this? They did not understand the thing. And now they have reached out to me, asking me, like, can you please help us implement a constructive strategy? So we've seen a lot of things happening in the past 3 years, and of course you have seen a lot of things happening for 8 years. And I have big hopes for the future of journalism.
Yeah. So now.
And I think what's really interesting is this has become a kind of Nordic phenomenon. I'm the odd one out. I'm a British Kenyan. So I came across these ideas around what journalism can be and how it can help society. But we did a study tour with our fellows. We have every year we have 12 Danish fellows that come to us to rethink journalism and go back into their newsrooms and try and help them.
And some Norwegian and Finnish. And,
and rethink how they can do their work better for 10 months. And we did what we call a study tour, and we went round different newsrooms in Denmark, but also Sweden and Norway. And it was so inspiring, these ideas that were happening, and taking concepts that we've been thinking about, but having their own twist and doing them in different ways and becoming world leaders. And in October, we're going to take a group of East European journalists and a group of East European editors, and we're going to do the same tour and have a think about how these Nordic ideas can be used in East Europe, where they face incredibly challenging circumstances, but they are so hungry to try something different because the kind of toxic media structures that they have right now are just not working, and people are moving away. So my role is the project lead for international projects and partners, and so I think it's very exciting to see how these ideas that have been percolating here in this region and experimented with can be taken to East Europe, and then as Ulrik mentioned, maybe East Africa as well as what we're looking at to serve problems there.
And Ingrid and I, we went to Georgia, not the state, but the nation, because they have decided there that constructive journalism should not only save their public service company, but the whole country, because you can't find a more polarized place than Georgia. But they think we need to find other ways of doing this, to tell the story, facilitate a public discussion about how can this be better. Because politics there has become a fist fight. They fight physically in the parliament. So how can journalism play a role there? UNESCO hired me to travel around in Romania and Moldova and Slovenia in order to talk to news editors there, in order to figure out how can they play a different role there instead of being part of the polarization process. And there's a big need for different approaches.
We will open up for questions from the audience, so if you can start thinking if you have a good question for the panel. But I would like to circle back to the Climate Explore program,
Sure.
because we are a science-based organization, and I think that I really love the idea of bringing the whole world to the Institute to kind of also spread it, of course, the whole idea of the framework. But I would like, because I know that they made a really nice recommendation for scientists. Could you elaborate on it?
Yeah, but we actually did a presentation of the project to about 150 scientists, and I slightly jokingly, but was kind of serious as well, that it was basically a love letter to scientists, because we had these journalists from these 5 continents in Denmark for 5 months, and every week they would spend time in the laboratories with the scientists, in the field with them, and they got to understand their work in a way that they never had in their general working practices. Often the relationship between journalists and scientists is quite transactional. The journalists come in, they want a soundbite, they want it quick, they want an answer. And scientists are like, my work is in a completely different time frame to this, and there's no easy, quick, snappy things that I can give you. And so it was a really exciting thing to see journalists and scientists working hand in hand and understanding the intricacies. And one of the things they came up with, as you say, is a set of recommendations where they said, we want to give some advice for journalists to work better with scientists, but also to help scientists have an easier relationship with journalists. And they set up this kind of framework. And some of it was quite surprising. It was things like, now we spent time with these scientists and understand their working practices. We really believe that scientists should try and bring their whole selves. They should try and speak to journalists about why they do their work, what it takes, what are the practicalities of that, rather than just the science itself. Because if we want to talk about hope, scientists are some of the real role models that this world need. If anyone's going to get us out of the myriad of messes we're in, it's scientists. And you just don't see enough of them. There's been research to show who are the figures you see in the news, and politicians are always number one. Scientists really aren't aired enough. And so I think what the program really showed is that we need to spend more time and energy bringing the news media together with the science world and helping them understand each other more, because both are needed in this climate transition to help chart a way forward.
But you might say that there are two groups of professions that the world really needs right now, that provides the world with new knowledge, right? One of them is scientists, and the other one are journalists. People have lost trust in journalists. If they lose trust in scientists as well, which there's a risk, and that was some of the recommendations to them, out of love, saying, sometimes you should say, no, I don't know anything about this. This is my personal view. This is not something I've researched. That's very, very credible. But some scientists do not do that. Another thing is sometimes they are too afraid to talk to journalists, even though they have actually done research on it and know something, because they're afraid that the journalist will cut corners or angle it too narrowly and all that. How can you make a conversation about that so we can provide the public with the right knowledge? That's the key thing. So journalists need to help science doing that.
Yeah. So does anybody have a question? You have a question. Good. Rob will give you the mic.
Thank you very much. Is this microphone on? Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm a great fan of constructive journalism, so thank you very much. I have a journalism background. We have child press here, young journalists doing constructive journalism.
Wow.
Good.
Great.
I would like to firstly say Africa is certainly not a shithole in any means. There are some fantastic journalists in Africa, African journalists. And as the former managing director of Al Jazeera English, I can say there are some fantastic journalists in Africa. I would also say that I'd really advise you to link up with Palestinian journalists, Syrian journalists, Iraqi journalists, to really get a sense of what the journalists face out there. Because I think it's a great project that you're doing, but I really think that you need to link up with other journalists around the regions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So was it a question or more like a comment?
A good advice.
No,
Yeah,
and
good
I
advice,
agree.
yeah.
And it's
But then
much,
yeah.
it's much easier for us here in Norway to like, oh, we just want to be constructive, and this is what we do, and yeah.
But can I, just one comment on that, because there are great journalistic organizations in all the Scandinavian countries trying to help journalists in some of these areas.
But don't go in there with the sort of white man's burden.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But what we have tried to do is basically try to help them stay alive, work in this very hostile environment.
I wouldn't use the word help. I would use the word support.
Yeah, but I agree. We shouldn't come and tell them exactly what to do, and that's not the approach.
That is actually one of the things that I love with the idea of the hub in Nairobi, is that you are giving the journalists a chance to come and be trained and get a good tool on how to do better journalism, and then you can go back to your newspaper and incorporate it. So that's actually, and I love the idea of it being linked to the UNEP, that are the only international big...
And you're absolutely right. There's nothing worse than people coming from the West and telling people what to do. So that's why they should be locally run. We see our role as a midwife to make sure that it's running. And then we might have a little position on a board or something, but it should be locally run.
Yeah. Other question? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Ingvild. I work at the Nobel Peace Center. And one of the things we try to do is to create hope in the world. And I've had the pleasure of working with Ulrich as well. My background is in journalism and from NRK. And I have a question for you, Ingrid. Because I'm curious about how you implement constructive journalism in a big news organization like the NRK. Is it something going on in a corridor somewhere, a sort of silo thing, or do you manage to trickle down and spread out in the organization?
Great question. And that was what we were talking about from the beginning, because everyone was like, oh, but Ingrid, because they gave me one position, me, and then like fix it. And people are like, oh, but you should have your own editorial room. And I was like, no. It shouldn't be just like a group of people doing constructive journalism and then the rest of the people are doing the same. We should all change, and so what I did was I went on a constructive tour. I traveled all across NRK and also like to other broadcasters and stuff to discuss with the local editorial rooms, like, okay, so we made this definition because we didn't want it to be just like, oh, someone made a fancy PowerPoint about a strategy and now the leader says like, this is one more thing you have to think about in your life that's already too busy before picking your child up from daycare. So we prioritized to travel around and discuss with each team, like, we made a definition. What does this mean for you guys in your everyday life? How are you already constructive? Because I knew that they already were. So we had to tell them, like, it's not something new. You are already doing this. How can you do more of it? What fits your everyday life? What local goals can you set? So we went around having these discussions to make sure that people kind of embraced it as their own and really understood what it was about and found their ways of doing it. But of course, it doesn't happen overnight, and changing journalists' habits, like that takes some time. But it has really worked, and different parts of NRK has found different ways of implementing it, like Dagsnytt 18, you know, our debate show. They have said that they have completely transformed their approach to their debates. So they used to like to call like winners and losers of the debate, but now they are recognizing that the best debates are those where both parties come out of the studio feeling like they had a decent discussion. We don't want it to be boring. We want it to be interesting, and we still want the conflicts and the problems and the issues, but we used it in a different way to create the discussions. And then, like our news for like the young news department, they have found their way of doing like explainer videos. So everyone is trying to find their way of doing it. But of course, some days you go, as Ulrich said, some days you go onto our webpage and it doesn't feel like this is something we care about. But we have really come a long way. Yeah.
But that I think that it's also what you're trying to do with this, and you have been saying like that there'll still be news, you know. It's not like everything should be constructive.
No.
Yeah.
They're different. I mean, let's say, God forbid, a bomb goes off out here. What's the role of the press? Now, that is to report it first. What happened? How many died? Where did they come from? Second question, maybe later this afternoon or tonight, who did it? Why did it happen? What was the reason why? But then, not today, but maybe on Thursday, the constructive answer would be, how do we in Norway prevent this ever happening again? Now what and how? So that journalism has a role to play in the different phases. I've just been trained that my job is to tell people about problems and then move on to new problems, and new problems, and new problems. And in the end, people say, I'm overwhelmed, I can't take it anymore. And I watch Netflix series instead, or go on TikTok and watch influencers. So that's the approach. Can I just say one comment at the end here, with Ingvild coming from the Nobel Peace Center. And they've introduced us to Maria Ressa, who was one of the two winners of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. The other one was Muratov. Maria Ressa is a hard-hitting investigative editor-in-chief of Rappler Media in the Philippines. She opened our conference with the following quote, and I can do it by heart because it really talks about what this Arendals Uke is all about and what constructive journalism is all about. She says, without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. And without trust, we have no shared reality. And government, journalism, and democracy cannot work. That's the given today. So what do we do in journalism? How does journalism evolve? And then she says it. Constructive journalism is the way journalism should always have been. And I think we are forced to think this way to help our societies self-correct by documenting what's wrong and then ask the question, what now and how? And the critical word here, she said, is help. And I think that really sums it up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do have time for one more question. Yeah?
Yes, thank you. I think Giles already told, we're from Child Press, we're trying to do constructive journalism for over 10 years. I'm also a chief editor at Child Press, and I find it's hard to reach a large audience with constructive journalism because it seems that people do like an earthquake more than strategies to reduce poverty, for example. So could you maybe give an advice to cover these constructive stories maybe more sexy, that it will reach a large audience?
Yeah, if I can give you one example, in the beginning when I started to talk about this in the newsroom of DR, in the beginning nobody thought it was a good idea. They really thought it was a bad idea. And the first time I thought, now we're on the right track. We were discussing a story. The statistical office in Denmark came out with a report saying that 40% of all Danes wanted a new job. And the newsroom in the morning meeting, we were about to talk about how bad bosses we have in Denmark and people hated their job and blah, blah, blah. And then there was an intern, a young journalist, raising her arm and ask a question. Excuse me, but if 40% say they want another job, does that mean that 60% of all Danes, despite all the stories about how bad people feel, how stressed they are, how bad the bosses are, that 60% think they have a dream job? That's, for me, very interesting. And with that approach, we completely swapped it around and did a story about that. What had happened and what is a dream job for you and what would it take to create that? Not forgetting that 40% wanted a different job, but first of all, this is a mindset. A good story can also be a good story. Don't forget the problem, but a good story can be a good story. And then it's a toolbox. What do you ask? How do you angle the story? How do you tell it? How do you implement? How do you do stories about doubt? How do you do stories about nuances? How do you do stories about inspiration? And one of the key questions is, what did they do in Norway?
Yeah, and I remember that we were taught when we went to journalism school, that research kills all good stories,
Yes.
because if you go into the numbers, you'll probably find the nuances, and that's why I think this framework is so great, because you can finally tell a story, and you don't have to just tell the black and the white.
And remember that doubt is a conversation starter. We have been trained, also, I guess also you, that we have to angle on either the white or the black, most likely the black. But the nuances in between. And sometimes when we are in doubt as persons, we start talking to each other. And one of the best stories in Denmark, and the story with most impact, was a former fellow we had who did a story based on the fact she had a 10-year-old girl in class, and she was the last one in her class not to have a smartphone. And she asked her readers, should I give her one or not? Is it good for her or not? What does science say? What do we know about this? And based on this, she created this series, which ended up changing the laws in Denmark, so that now they have reintroduced books in Danish schools. And everybody, because we all have that. How do we use screens? How should we do it? What's the culture we have around the dinner table? What in the workplace? What do we do when we sit and talk to our friend? Do we check SMS while we talk? How should we help our children? Is it good or not for them? How do you do it in schools? How do you do it at home? And with those questions, daring to be in doubt, that creates dialogue, and that's what you work with all the time at the Nobel Peace Center. The best weapon is to sit down and talk, right?
But Ingrid, you might have some ideas for the young journalists.
Yeah, and I want you to come visit NRK and we can all explore this together. No, but we sometimes it's just about, you can still like make a headline where you mention both the issue and solution, for instance. Like, you just have to be creative with your headlines and your approach to it. And also I've seen that one of the longest articles I read that I was wrote that I thought was might be boring because I tried to make it as nuanced as possible, was the story that reached 750,000 people. So I think it's a misconception that constructive journalism is like boring, that people don't want to read it. Like, our numbers show something else. Yeah, and we also, one of our goals when we started this project was to implement this in journalism schools as well, because we saw that that was needed, and now they're all bringing it in as a part of their courses in Norway. So yeah,
I don't think you guys are the problem.
No.
It's the older guys. Young people have this down. Like, I think the future of journalism is bright. We just have to get the oldies on board.
And there's never been more need for great journalists than now. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
There is hope.
I would like to give the three of you a chance to just say some final words. Maybe you want to start, Snire?
Yeah, come and talk to us. We're interested to hear what you think, and we'd love to chat afterwards.
And we're not a sect, and we want all the critical questions, and we want to keep this discussion alive about what is the future of journalism, and we want you all to participate and to affect us and make sure that we figure out this road together.
And I'm so old I can remember when in journalism some frustrated reporters and editors back in the late 70s and early 80s 1970s and 80s started talking about journalism was too slobbery. We were not being critical enough. We were not asking the right questions. We were just handing the microphone to people with power. So they talked about investigative reporting. Remember that? And with that, because they created this vocabulary about a different kind of more quality journalism, you could start teaching it, you could start talking about it, you could start creating formats, and you could even change legislation so you could get the documents out of courts and politics and so forth and so on. For us, constructive journalism is the same thing. We have invented a word because without a word, we don't have a vocabulary, we can't talk. But it's not a religion. It's plainly quality journalism. It's about the meaning we want to create. With press freedom follows press responsibility. And we need to be aware of that. Journalism is not just a product to be sold. And what has happened in journalism is it has become like that. We have engaged ourselves in this war of attention. How can we get the click? How can we get the views? How can we get the ratings so we can get the money? We can't. We have to produce stories that are meaningful and trustworthy for people. Then the rest will follow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I like to think about that. I actually have my dream job working here at GRID, and one of the reasons it is my dream job is that I found you guys, and even though we apparently are not a religion, at least I became really happy when I found it, because I think that this is also the answer to a lot of the issues that we are facing, that sometimes we get quite depressed when we look into the data and how the environment is managing, like how we are treating our planet, to say it more blunt. Tonight we have a green mingle. We will start again at 7:15. I hope that all of you will come and hear the conversation that our managing director, Karen Landmark, is going to have with Kristin Herreili about her work in the mountains. And then at 8 o'clock, There will be some snacks and maybe something in the bar. So please stay in the tent and have a fun night. Thank you for joining.